Welcome, fearless viewers, to another chilling tale from our realm of horror. Tonight, we delve into the darkest corners of the human psyche, where shadows lurk and fear reigns supreme. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel and join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Help us reach our next milestone of 1,100 subscribers, as we continue to uncover spine-tingling stories that will haunt your dreams. Now, brace yourself, as the journey into the unknown begins. Last year at the beginning of summer, I visited my Nana's farm with my mom for just a weekend. Her farm is located in a very rural and secluded area, right at the foot of a mountain in a rural area of South Carolina. The roads in my area are poorly maintained and barely wide enough for two cars to pass by each other. The houses are spread out and pretty far back into the tree line from the road, so there is very little ambient light besides a car's headlights in the distance. My mom and I were driving along, her in the driver's seat and me in the passenger. It was around 11 p.m., and we were about 15 minutes away from Nana's, deep in the woods, with the radio down almost silent. We came onto this straight stretch of road in a heavily wooded area, and suddenly, this blur of a creature darted out across the road right at the edge of our headlights. It was moving incredibly fast, but my mom and I got a really good look at it and both of us agreed on what we saw. It was a reasonably large creature, roughly the size of a person, maybe just a bit bigger. Neither of us could make out the shape of its head, but we both remember it appearing to have a segmented body as if it were emaciated and its ribcage was poking out. The reflection of the light made it hard for me to tell the color, but my mom said she remembered it to be dark, and she didn't see any fur or hair. It had long gangly limbs as it moved across the road. It didn't run the way a dog or a horse would with all four legs. The best word to describe it would be that it was loping, using its front limbs to pull itself along and moving considerably fast. We both said something along the lines of, "What the heck is that?" as it crossed in front of us. As we got up to where it crossed, I turned to look at it, and as it reached the other side of the road, where it was just out of our headlights, I looked and I swear on my life, it stood up and ran, not like a dog, but like a person as if it were bipedal. I immediately yelled that it had stood up, and we both started getting nervous. I honestly would have thought that I was going insane had another person in the car not seen it with me. My mom has always been a pretty level-headed person and not superstitious in any circumstance, but she was incredibly nervous and was pretty scared about this, and we had to agree not to tell Nana about this to avoid scaring her. I recently came across an article about a woman who was hunting and claimed to have seen an invisible or cloaked creature that she likened to the predator from the movie of the same name. I read her story and saw the picture she took of the supposed predator. Regarding the picture, I believe it may be a result of a sun flare and a close-up of her face. However, I am not dismissing her story. In fact, I'm quite doing the opposite, as I also have had a similar encounter that led me to seek out if anybody else has experienced this predator-type creature in the woods. Now on to my encounter. When I was around 5 years old, I used to play near the woods behind my grandmother's house. I played there frequently, and my grandmother would keep an eye on me from the kitchen or living room as the house had large windows facing the woods. Every now and then, she would come out and check on what I was doing. I was really into digging in the dirt and collecting unusual rocks and arrowheads scattered around the area where my grandmother lived. This is Midwest Illinois, not far from Cahokia Mounds. So finding arrowheads was not super uncommon. Anyway, that day I remember picking out a spot to dig. I had been out there for quite some time because I remember I had a decent-sized hole going when something caught my eye in the tree I was next to. I don't really know how to explain it, but it looked like a heat wave cutting off the branch. It was fall. I remember this because I had my pink jacket on, and I remember thinking that my mom was going to be mad that I had dirt around the bottom of my arms from digging. I also remember there being a lot of leaves on the ground. Anyway, I am staring at this heat wave and realizing it was somewhat of a human shape. So here I am, 5 years old, and wondering why an invisible man is in the tree. I remember feeling scared but unsure what to do. Then it started moving and making a faint clicking sound. That is when I decided I was not supposed to see this and hightailed it back to the house. My grandmother saw I was pretty shaken, and I remember telling her I had just seen an angel. In my 5-year-old mind, I didn't know what else it could be. I had never seen aliens or heard of ghosts or monsters at this point, so it really had to be an angel, because that's all my little mind could think of. Fast forward to when I'm about 12 years old or so. By this time, the encounter was way out of my mind. I loved watching action and sci-fi movies. My dad rented a movie called Predator. I'm watching it with him, and the first time you see the Predator invisible/cloaked, I about crapped myself. All the memories from that day digging in the dirt came flooding back. I even asked my dad if the Predator was real or not and if anybody had known any animal that could do something like that. He wasn't really sure, but he told me the Predator thing was definitely fake. It wasn't like today where we could just Google it and figure it all out, you know. I had no access to the internet, so again, I just put it out of my mind. Fast forward to about the year 2004. I'm grown, have 3 small children, and just went through a separation from my husband. I moved to the next town over to an apartment with my kids. These apartments are all 1-level duplexes and 5 buildings. I am at the very last apartment in the previous building. The apartments are considered in town, but they're more on the outskirts. A deep ditch runs behind the buildings, and a chain-link fence separates them from this massive set of woods. There are about 6 or 7 trees on our side of the wall. If you follow the ditch a little bit, you'll hit this small forest that eventually leads to a country road with a bunch of extensive farmland and a bunch more forest and whatnot. I am a smoker, but I would not smoke in the apartment because of the kids. So I often went out onto the back porch. One night I was up late doing laundry and stuff after the kids went to bed. I decided to go outside and take a smoke break before I went to sleep. I am back on the porch and started hearing this faint clicking sound. I immediately looked to the ditch, because I had seen a groundhog there a few days before and thought perhaps it was there again. The backyard is dimly illuminated by the nearby playground light to the right of the back porch. I only turned on my porch light when I went out for a quick smoke. I didn't see a groundhog or any movement from the ditch, so I went back to smoking my cigarette. The faint clicking sound kept happening, and a slight movement made me look up into the tree to the left of my porch. Something was there. I didn't see a groundhog or anything like that, but what I did see was vaguely in the shape of a humanoid. It had to have been the same thing that I saw when I was 5. It gave off that same distortion. It was crouched down on the branch with one arm out, holding on to the tree trunk. I couldn't believe it. Is this really happening? Is all I could think to myself. Has it come to kill me for seeing it all those years ago? All I could think about was my kids and everybody sleeping in the apartment. I ran inside and slammed the door, locking it immediately. I ran to my kids' rooms and closed all their windows and locked those as well. Then I turned off all the lights in the living room and stared out the blinds at the tree to see if I could catch another glimpse of it. I sat there for what had to be about 10 minutes, maybe even more, and I never saw another thing. I began to think maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was just hallucinating it. And just as I was finally talking myself down, my neighbor's dog came running across the yard and started barking at the tree at the same branch where I had seen this predator thing. That freaked me out even more, because that dog was not a barker, and now it kind of reassured what I had just seen. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I have never seen anything like it again, and I don't know if I ever want to. Does anybody listening to this have any idea what it could be? I had a really strange experience last winter at Congaree National Park, just outside of Columbia. It's a beautiful boardwalk that winds through the swamps and cypress forest. If you look at the image, the story might make more sense. I used to live in Columbia, South Carolina, and I often visited the Congaree National Park, also known as the CNP, so I know the area fairly well. I would frequently hop on the fence and walk along the boardwalk at night. It was incredibly peaceful to stroll through the swamp and listen to the sounds of wildlife. There was never a ranger or a guard present after hours, so I was always alone. I went for a walk in October of 2021 with a flashlight. There were lots of insects and frogs making noise, but it suddenly stopped when I was about a mile in. I heard what I thought was my wife calling me from the trailhead, but she wasn't there with me. I was alone, she was out of town. I then heard water sloshing to my right and saw nothing. I chalked it up to being tired and kept on moving. The wildlife started up shortly, and everything seemed to be fine again. Probably about 15 minutes later, I noticed that it got nearly quiet again, and I heard swamp water sloshing to my left once more. But this time, it was much more deliberate, almost like somebody walking with purpose. I was in a thick portion of the cypress and couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of me at my best. And then I heard my wife's voice again. Again, she wasn't with me. She was out of town, certainly not moving through a swamp at 1 a.m. I saw what looked like a human silhouette move between the trees for a split second, but it was off, very skinny, pale, and taller than me at 6 foot. I noped the hell out of there really quickly and ran almost the 2 miles back to my truck and didn't slow down until I heard the wildlife again. Like I said, this is a boardwalk that's in a swamp in the boonies. Nobody is walking around in the dead of night like I am. I'm probably the weirdest person around here, at least I think so. I feel like I should add that I wasn't high or sleep deprived. I just like going in the woods at night. I was so freaked out by this, I came to the show and had to submit it 100% immediately because I wanted you to hear it. I am convinced that I have encountered some sort of crawler or wendigo or something else that can mimic voices. Growing up on a small farm bordering a forest in Tennessee, I experienced numerous unexplainable events, but one series of occurrences remains a mystery to this day. When I was around 12 or 13 years old, I began having recurring dreams that took place in a forest. In these dreams, I would come across a large black wolf with glowing red eyes. Strangely, each time I saw this wolf, there would be a death on the farm within a day or two, usually involving a chicken being preyed upon by a predator. During my final dream involving the wolf, a woman's voice accompanied its presence in the forest. I could hear her, but she always remained just out of my line of sight. Though her words are now hazy in my memory, I recall her saying, "Do not fear the wolf," among other things. As the wolf circled me, I didn't feel fear, but rather a deep sense of respect for its ancient power. After that last encounter, I never saw the wolf again. But the dreams felt more vivid than reality. Since then, I've wondered about the identity of the wolf and the woman in the forest. These dreams marked the beginning of my fascination with the paranormal, leading to many more inexplicable experiences. I've often wondered if I connected with the forest spirits or a Native American presence during these encounters. I lived in Maryland, but before you think of blue crabs and beaches, I'm in a more rural area of the state. My uncle owned a condo at a popular beach, Ocean City. In late May of 2018, I decided to take my friend Omar to the condo since no one was using it, and I got permission to take the keys and go. It's about a 3-hour drive from my home to Ocean City. Since I was a newer, good driver and had recently gotten my provisional license, I decided to drive off for a vacation with my best friend. I own an old black 1970 Chevy Nova, but it is as fast as a road runner and very reliable. I was extremely hyped up with my new car and decided to purchase a roll cage, which would come into play later in the story. I was told it was stupid and costly, but my family eventually admitted how badass my car looked, plus, it was very safe. So on May 28th, I drove my Nova to Omar's house about 5 miles away from mine, and we set off. Depending on which way you go to Ocean City, much of the drive is through farmland and small towns near the Potomac River. We were about 2 hours into the drive, and since it was still midday, we were not pressed for time, seeing how we would be there for about 2 weeks. As Omar snacked on chips loudly, he asked if we could shuffle some music on his phone. My phone was charging on a portable charger in my hoodie pocket, and the speaker was rolling at my feet. Since it was a vintage car, I didn't remove the old speakers or anything, just the stuff I needed since, I needed to fit in the roll cage. I said of course, because Omar and I share the same taste in rap music. I picked up the speaker, and he connected it via Bluetooth with his phone. Now, since I had a loud engine in the car, the speaker was equally loud to balance out the noise. Omar, of course, blasted the speaker to its max, but I wasn't complaining because the song went hard. While I was too busy rapping to the loud lyrics, I failed to notice the deer standing in the center of the street. Omar yelled for me to swerve, which I did. But as my rear bumper clipped the deer, my car flipped into the air, doing a full corkscrew, and landed, sliding on its hood for 12 feet or so. We hung there by our seatbelts in shock, not fully comprehending the insanity of what had just unfolded. I had busted my nose and scratched my face pretty badly, and Omar banged his forehead on the dash, but besides that, I'm pretty sure we were ultimately fine. I looked over at Omar as he looked at me, and we both laughed, partly because we lived and mostly because we were in a weird state of nervous shock. It took a minute to compose ourselves. Still strapped in and hanging upside down, we began to realize that a damn deer had flipped my car. We somehow got out of my door, crawling painfully through the window, which was shattered all to hell. As Omar stepped out, he met my gaze. I was looking at the same deer standing there, looking at us as if we had broken a twig. Omar's jaw dropped, as did mine. "Maybe it's some metal statue some guy left out as a prank or something," Omar said. Then the deer blinked. Thoroughly freaked out, we started back towards the car, making sure not to break eye contact with the thing. As my thigh bumped into the car, the deer stood up on its back legs and let out a scream that made my head hurt. Omar and I began to run, but knowing we had nowhere to run, we stumbled to the front of my car. But the thing was gone. Out of nowhere, it seemingly just vanished. Our hearts pounding, we tried in vain to flip my precious car. Thankfully, the roll cage I'd invested in not only saved our lives, but most of my car as well. Since flipping it wouldn't work, Omar had a good idea: call Marco. Our friend Leo's uncle had a towing service and also worked in insurance. Remembering the pain it took to get a company to insure a teen driver like me, I quickly dialed Mr. Romani. He picked up instantly and greeted me like a brother. I shared our situation and where the last gas station I saw was, leaving out the detail of the deer creature and replacing it with a hit-and-run driver. His employees were all off, but he told me he could drive us to pick up the car. He took us to the beach and took the car back. I quickly thanked him and asked him to hurry, thinking the beast might still be close. He hung up, and we sat back to back on the side of the road. We waited, and it felt like we waited for a very long time, but it luckily only took him about an hour to get to us because he lived closer to Ocean City than we did. He flipped the car using his truck and tools and then loaded it on his truck. We hopped in and thanked him. He told me and Omar the car would be fine in his hands, and if we saw the car on the road that flipped us, to point it out. Omar and I glanced at one another, and I said I would. The rest of the trip was uneventful. We spent our 2 weeks on the beach and boardwalk. On our second to last day, I got a call from Marco saying all was in order and the car was ready to be dropped off at the condo tomorrow. I told Omar the news, and we both breathed a sigh of relief. As the amazing person he was, the work it took to repair my car was cost-free. I thanked him, and we hung up. On the drive back, I made sure to take a different route home while Omar looked up possible explanations of what could have happened. We were so caught up in the joys of vacation that we had barely mentioned it to each other. He found stories of things called skinwalkers, which can manifest and take the shape of creatures. I drove my car much more carefully on the way back and got us home safely. Although, for about 2 weeks after that, there was always a tapping noise on my window. I could have sworn that I heard a voice that sounded like a bad imitation of Omar's voice, whispering as a lure to get me outside. I knew whatever was outside was not my best friend.